Police in Britain say they have arrested almost 400 people in connection with days of unrest aimed at migrants and the UK's Muslim community. The killing of 3 girls at a dance class in the city of Southport by a 17-year-old man sparked the violence. The trouble erupted soon after the killings, and British police say online disinformation played a part in fueling the riots. Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer has promised to bring the full force of the law to bear on people who took part in what he called an act of far-right thuggery.
The aftermath of attacks by far-right groups on this hotel in Rotherham, targeting the asylum seekers living here. Some demonstrators say the violence escalated beyond their expectations.
I arrived yesterday at about 1 o'clock to do a peaceful protest. I didn't want any violence to happen. I saw a police officer knocked unconscious. It did shock us. We were a little bit scared at start, but I understand why people have been upset and the retaliation from it.
Similar unrest has erupted in several towns and cities across parts of the UK in recent days. It was initially sparked by the killing of 3 young girls in a dance class in the town of Southport. Reports spread on social media falsely claimed the perpetrator was an asylum seeker who had recently arrived in the UK. The riots are often being met by counter-protests. Prime Minister Keir Starmer has denounced the disorder.
Whatever the apparent motivation, this is not protest, it is pure violence, and we will not tolerate attacks on mosques or our Muslim communities. So the full force of the law will be visited on all those who are identified as having taken part in these activities.
But condemnation by the government has not dissolved all fears. These members of London's Muslim community say they no longer feel safe.
I feel very stressed and it's very distressing moment in our life. We've never seen this kind of far-right group active against anti-migrant. So we are living fear and anxiety. This could be anything could happen to us.
Well, I feel threatened, scared to come out of my house because Muslim people, we're not terrorists. That's how I feel like. I feel like we're being threatened, it's not safe.
Several countries, including Indonesia and Nigeria, have warned their citizens living in or visiting the UK to stay vigilant and avoid the far-right demonstrations.
All right, Charlotte Chelsom-Pill, she is standing by in London on this story for us. Charlotte, we know that police in the UK traditionally do not carry firearms, but this proposal from the Prime Minister to have a standing army of police to deal with the rioting, is that going to be the exception to the rule?
Yeah, we've heard today that this standing army will be deployed. What does that mean exactly? Well, essentially, they will be specially trained police officers who will be assisting local forces where violence is found to be breaking out. Now, to answer your question, the Prime Minister has said very clearly he's dismissed calls for the army to be brought in. So you aren't going to see that sort of escalation. These will be just specially trained police officers. But it really does reflect how strongly the government is and how quickly the government is trying to crack down on these riots. There have been a number of announcements, including about the justice system, really trying to warn anyone who might be considering taking part going forward that they will be met with the full force of the law. They will be processed through the justice system quickly. The government has said that there are prison places available. The justice system here is very overstretched. They've stressed that those who are taking part in this kind of activity will feel the full force of the law.
You know, we've had countries today in parts of the world issuing warnings to their citizens who are traveling to the UK, including Nigeria and Indonesia. Just how dangerous are the streets of Britain tonight?
Well, those taking part in this are certainly an absolute minority. Nevertheless, this violence has spread to towns and cities across the UK, across England and Northern Ireland. So there is a considerable concern, as you heard in the report that you just played, among members of the Muslim community. Clearly, we know that the targets of this violence have been, for example, mosques. We know hotels housing asylum seekers as well, and that is causing a lot of concern. But as I say, the government has responded by saying that it does intend to crack down on this very quickly and very firmly.
Some of the people in the protests say that this stems from legitimate grievances about immigration. Is the UK government, is it listening to that point of view?
So Keir Starmer the Prime Minister has dismissed that outright, as have many others. So Keir Starmer has said that this is not protest, this is a violent thuggery, putting the responsibility very clearly with far-right agitators. Many have said that this is not the moment to be talking about any concerns about immigration, of which there are some. It has been a topic of conversation here, particularly in last month's election. But what is going on here is violent criminal activity, and that really is the focus of the government at the moment.
Charlotte Chelsom-Pill for us in London. Charlotte, as always, thank you. I'm joined now by Imran Ahmed. He is the chief executive of the Center for Countering Digital Hate. He's an authority on extremism, disinformation, and conspiracy theories. Mr. Ahmed, it's good to have you with us. Can you explain to us how online disinformation played a role in the riots of the past week in the UK?
Well, in the immediate aftermath of the terrible attack in Southport, what we saw was people rushing, not to try and work out the truth, not to come together and say how terrible this was, but to deliberately spread lies in order to target particular communities. And we see this happen, do we not, after every atrocity or tragedy these days, that people are immediately rushing out to blame it on Jews or LGBTQ plus people, or in this instance, migrants, Muslims in particular. And so we saw not only a rush of people seeking to weaponize this moment, but more crucially, when normal people went to those platforms to try and work out what on earth was going on, and this, it's a normal thing that we do these days, is when something terrible happens, we go to social media. Social media algorithms were selecting disinformation and making sure they were at the top of feeds. Why? Because they've worked out, as have bad actors, that disinformation gets disproportionate engagement.
Sure.
And therefore they amplify. It keeps people on those platforms arguing there, looking for the truth, something that on social media you're very unlikely to find.
You say, after the killings of the girls, they rushed to spread this disinformation. Do we know where they are? Are we talking about people or groups in the UK, or were there foreign state actors who maybe are playing a role in this?
Look, it's almost certain that countries like Russia and China, but Russia in particular, were rushing in to fill that vacuum of information when we were trying to work out what had happened. And when the police were still dealing with grievously harmed children, that in those moments we saw hostile states trying to weaponize the moment, but we also saw domestic bad actors. We saw people that are well-known, far-right liars, the kind of people that will target any community if they have a chance, white supremacists, anti-migration activists, and we saw them rushing in with their lies as usual, saying it was a Muslim, and they said initially it was a Muslim asylum seeker. Some of those people, and of course X is a particularly bad platform for this, the platform formerly known as Twitter. But what we saw was some of those people who had been banned by X, who Elon Musk then let back on when he took over the platform. They, of course, had been banned for being super spreaders of hate-filled disinformation. Now that they're back on the platform, not only have they been given their megaphone back, but actually their megaphone has been turbocharged. And we saw as well the proprietor of that platform, Mr. Musk himself, spreading disinformation, in fact suggesting that Britain is on the brink of a civil war, which is preposterous. This isn't a civil war. This is just a bunch of drunken lunatics running around trying to have some fun by taking advantage of this moment.
You advise governments on how to counter hate speech. What advice would you give the UK government now?
Well, the same advice I'd give to the European Union right now, which is use the powers you've just given yourselves. Both the United Kingdom and the European Union in the past year have passed legislation, the Digital Services Act in the EU, and my team in Brussels is talking to the Commission and to the regulators out there on a regular basis, and to the British Parliament, which passed the Online Safety Act in October 2023. Use the powers you've got. Hold these companies accountable. You legislated because you recognized there was a problem. And it's important that in this moment, I know that Britain has left the European Union, but I would hope that the Commission, the United Kingdom are talking to each other, saying, between us, what powers do we have? And how can we help the United Kingdom deal with this moment of great potential harm?
Yeah, and you say that on a day that a U.S. federal court ruled that Google is an illegal monopoly and has abused its power on the markets that it monopolizes, according to the court. Let me just ask you, with that in mind, what about viewers and consumers of social media content? What advice do you have for them?
Social media is a wonderful platform for entertainment and connecting with people you already know. It's not a very good platform for learning information about something that's happening. And if you take action based on information that you get from social media, you might, like these people here, find yourself in a jail cell eventually. Because the truth is that disinformation spreads disproportionately quickly on social media. It is a dangerous place to try and get good information from. And the best thing that we can do is turn to legitimate sources of news, people that have journalistic standards, that have to abide by negligence law, by defamation law, and everything else, like your own station.
Yeah, but we're told constantly, especially on social media, that the mainstream media or the journalists, traditional gatekeepers, are not trustworthy. That's a big. Obviously, we know it's not true, but a lot of people believe it. I got 20 seconds. Do you see this situation getting better or worse in the short term?
Look, I think that this is going to spur a lot of action from those regulators who have these new powers. And I very much hope to see them take action. The truth is that this is a disaster for social media companies, because not only have they this time done something, this isn't just about something where there's a mild connection to offline harm. There is a very specific connection. The people out there who are rioting have been lied to by algorithms and by bad actors on social media platforms, and are driven now to attacking police, attacking our communities, attacking Muslim businesses, attacking the fabric of the nation.
Imran Ahmed, unfortunately, we are out of time, but we appreciate your analysis tonight. Thank you. Well, I want to bring in now Ed Hodgson. He's UK research manager with the think tank More in Common. He joins us tonight from London. Ed, it's good to have you with us. I understand you have been looking into the riots that are taking place across Britain. What we're seeing right now, is this representative of the mood in the country towards refugees and immigration?
Well, there's a number of ways you can look at this, and lots of people have suggested that the riots are representative of sort of a broader, ordinary British opinion that sort of immigration is too high and we need to take in fewer refugees. And it is true that if you look at broader public opinion, it is sort of a mainstream majority view now that immigration levels in the UK are too high. But it's almost the wrong time to be having that conversation. We've had lots of conversations in the UK about immigration for the last few years. It's kind of almost all that politicians have talked about. But the majority of people who are concerned about immigration and want immigration to come down are not taking part in these riots. And in fact, they have strong concern for law and order. They don't support violent protest, and they don't support sort of intimidating ethnic minorities. So while it is true that more broadly in the UK, there is high levels of concern about immigration right now, these views are not really being represented, and those people are not being represented by these violent rioters.
So are people worried that immigration is not being taken seriously enough? I mean, we've heard politicians talking about it. I mean, you remember Brexit. Are people, feeling that their issues are falling on deaf ears?
Yeah, I mean, there's huge disillusionment with politics across the country. And it's not just immigration, it's the health service. People say they can't get a doctor's appointment. It's the cost of living. People say their energy bills are going up. It's housing. People say they can't get a house. There's huge amounts of disillusionment. In fact, we poll people and 3/4 of people say the system is rigged against them. But the truth is, the majority of these people, again, disillusionment with politics is a majority view in the UK. These rioters are not the majority, and actually the majority of people want these rioters put in prison, and they want tougher sentences on people who break the law to prove their point on things like this.
And let me ask you, how confident are you in the truthfulness of answers when you poll people in the UK? I mean, how convinced are you that people are telling you the truth?
Well, luckily enough, we've just had a general election to test our polling. There were some errors on the polling, some more errors than there have been in the past, but generally the pollsters got it right, and we were able to predict the election results. So we can be fairly certain that people are more or less telling the truth. Obviously, on some issues, it's harder to reach very extreme groups of people online. So this very fringe group of people who are protesting, again, as I say, they might represent 1% of the country, but they're not going to come up in 10% of the country in opinion polls. But broadly, the polling industry in the UK is pretty transparent and pretty accurate.
I mean, I asked that because I was reading today about a report that came out 10 years ago that was issued on systematic sex abuse and grooming of children by Pakistani British men. Authorities, they knew that the abuse was taking place, and they say that they turned a blind eye for fear of being branded racist. So considering what's happening right now, how can we know that people are being honest with pollsters when they're asked about their feelings about foreigners, others, and xenophobia?
Yeah, the situation in Rotherham and around the area with the grooming gangs is a really tough one. And we saw those images earlier and on the screen now of the protest outside the Asylum Hotel there. When we speak to voters in Rotherham, and we do polling across the country, but we also do focus groups. So we've been in focus groups around the country for the last week speaking to voters. And we try to get people with which we know have similar views so they can be more honest. And I'm always surprised by how honest people really are, sort of sharing the unvarnished truth. But when you speak to people in Rotherham, they tell you that they're appalled by the grooming gangs. They're scared about the grooming gangs. It's sort of completely eroded in some communities, all trust in the police there. But at the same time, they feel unsafe in other ways. And they feel like their high street, for example, the police aren't doing a proper job on keeping crime away. So while those people are appalled by the history of the grooming gang there, and the history of the grooming gang definitely made it easier to whip up sort of this far-right anti-immigrant sentiment, for the majority of people in Rotherham, the main concern will be safety on the streets, and sort of having violent gangs of people walking around isn't going to help that.
Ed Hodgson from the think tank More in Common. Ed, good talking with you. Fascinating to go through the figures and the statistics about what people think and believe. Thank you.